Single black dad drives his drunk millionaire boss home after the company party. When she wakes up, she blamed him. Ethan Carter was the kind of man who built his life on quiet order. At 36, he had turned discipline into a way of surviving. Every morning followed the same rhythm. The coffee pot whirring at 6:15, the faint smell of toast in the kitchen, and his 9-year-old daughter Lily humming softly while coloring at the table. Their small apartment in Chicago wasn't fancy, but it was home, warm, tidy, and peaceful. He'd made sure of that. Stability was something Ethan had spent years chasing, and now that he had it, he guarded it like gold. He'd been with Titan Global Solutions for 6 years, rising through the ranks to become a senior analyst. In a company filled with Ivy League degrees and powerful last names, Ethan stood out not because of privilege, but because of persistence. He was known for his precision, his calm under pressure, and the quiet dignity he carried even in rooms where he was often the only black man. His colleagues admired his professionalism, though some whispered that he was too serious, a phrase he'd heard one too many times in his life. He had learned what that really meant. Stay in your place, don't make anyone uncomfortable. Being a black man in corporate America meant walking a tightrope that others couldn't see. He had to be perfect, unflappable, and careful in ways his white coworkers never had to think about. A raised eyebrow in a meeting could be misread as an attitude. A disagreement could be labeled as aggression. Over time, Ethan mastered the art of being professional without being visible, competent without being threatening, present without ever fully belonging. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. Titan Global was a fortress of ambition. Glass walls, designer suits, and smiles that never quite reached the eyes. Ethan knew its language. Performance reviews wrapped in polite racism, diversity slogans masking subtle bias. He saw it in the promotions that always skipped over people who looked like him, in the quiet hesitation when his ideas were better than the room expected. Still, Ethan stayed focused. He wasn't there for validation. He was there for Lily. She was 9 now, bright, curious, always asking questions about everything from space to why people treated each other unfairly. Her laughter was the soundtrack to his evenings, and every paycheck, every late night, was for her future. Since her mother had left when Lily was 3, Ethan had learned to juggle everything. Packing lunches, checking homework, and tucking her in after long days that stretched past midnight. He didn't complain. Responsibility had shaped him since childhood. Losing his mother at 11 and growing up in foster care had stripped away comfort but taught him something deeper. Never depend on anyone to protect you. His boss, Rebecca Sinclair, was everything the corporate world admired. A self-made millionaire by 39, sharp, confident, always dressed in precision-tailored suits. To the company, she was an icon of success. To Ethan, she was a daily reminder of how easily power could mask prejudice. She praised him publicly, yet privately questioned his reports. She smiled at his work ethic, yet spoke to him like a subordinate even when he outranked some of her favorites. Her comments were subtle but sharp. "You're very well-spoken, Ethan," she'd once said after a presentation, tone drenched in surprise. He had smiled politely, the same way he had for years, swallowing the frustration because experience had taught him where reacting led. As December rolled around, the air in Chicago was cold and heavy with snow. The annual Titan Global Gala was the biggest night of the year, a polished display of wealth and status. The ballroom glittered with crystal lights, expensive champagne, and laughter that sounded forced. Ethan didn't care much for these events, but attendance wasn't optional. He adjusted his tie, exchanged pleasantries, and stayed near the back, content to observe the theater of it all. Rebecca arrived late, stunning in a silver gown that caught the light like ice. People swarmed her, eager to be seen in her orbit. But as the night wore on, her laughter grew louder, her words slurred. By the time dessert was served, she was visibly drunk, glass in hand, her confidence unraveling in slow motion. Her assistant tried to help, but Rebecca waved her off. "I can handle myself," she said, voice brittle and defiant. When the party ended and the guests started slipping out, Rebecca stood near the bar, struggling to keep her balance. No one wanted to be responsible. No one wanted to risk proximity to a powerful executive in that state. Ethan watched for a moment, torn between caution and conscience. The easy thing would be to walk away. The right thing was harder. He stepped forward and quietly offered to drive her home. She looked at him, eyes glassy but searching. For a second, it seemed she might refuse. Then she nodded, unsteady, clutching her purse. The ride through the city was silent except for the hum of the heater. Rebecca mumbled a few incoherent words about her success, her loneliness, and how no one really respected her. Ethan said little, focused on getting her home safely. When they reached her upscale apartment building, he helped her to the door, made sure she was inside, and left. It was over, he thought. Just another late night. That small act of kindness, that single decision to help, would soon become the crack that shattered his carefully built life. The next morning, Ethan woke early, packed Lily's lunch, and dropped her off at school. Felt like any other day. Until his phone buzzed with a message from HR, urgent meeting, 10 a.m. He frowned, unsure what it meant. When he stepped into the office, the air felt heavier. Conversations paused as he walked by. And when Rebecca called him to her office, her voice clipped and cold. He couldn't have known that she was about to accuse him of something that could destroy everything he had worked for. For Ethan, the storm had already begun. He just hadn't realized it yet. The email from HR arrived just after 8 a.m., short and formal. "Ethan Carter, please report to Ms. Sinclair's office at 10 a.m. regarding an urgent matter." Ethan reread it twice, a flicker of unease tightening his chest. Something felt off. Rebecca rarely met employees directly unless it was performance-related, and his record was spotless. When he entered her office that morning, the air was sharp and cold. Rebecca sat behind her glass desk, her usual polished smile replaced by a mask of accusation. On her phone screen was a photo, her in bed, hair messy, makeup smeared, looking disoriented. "Care to explain this?" she asked, voice clipped. Ethan's stomach dropped. He studied the photo quietly. "Ms. Sinclair, you were heavily drunk last night. I drove you home and made sure you got in safely. That's all." Her expression didn't change. "A man like you in my house and this is the result? Do you realize what that looks like?" There it was. The wordless weight of suspicion that had followed him his whole life. The tone that said your word means less than mine. Ethan kept his voice calm, his heartbeat steady. "I didn't touch you, Miss Sinclair. You know that." She leaned back, a faint smirk on her lips. "Who do you think they'll believe, Ethan? You or me?" That was the moment he understood. It wasn't confusion. It was a setup. Ethan had sensed her bias for years. The jokes about diversity hires, the subtle digs, the way she always made him prove himself twice. But this was different. This was an attack. When he returned to his desk, whispers had already begun. People glanced up as he passed, eyes darting away when he looked back. By lunch, the story had spread across the floor. Something had happened between Ethan and Rebecca after the party. No one said it outright, but everyone thought it. By Monday morning, HR called him in again. This time, the director, Natalie Cooper, was waiting with Rebecca and two company lawyers. The mood was formal, suffocating. Rebecca repeated her story. She woke up disheveled, confused, and certain Ethan had taken advantage of her. She even implied he'd stayed in her house longer than he admitted. Ethan sat still, hands folded. "May I ask a question?" he said quietly. "Who took the photo?" "I did," she replied. He nodded. "That's your first lie," he thought. They suspended him pending investigation. Unpaid. Effective immediately. Ethan left the building in silence, the cold wind slicing through his coat. Every part of him wanted to shout, to defend himself, but experience had taught him something. Emotion would only make him look guilty. He needed proof, not outrage. And he had it. What no one at Titan Global knew was that Ethan had recorded everything from the night before. The moment he found Rebecca crying in the restroom, to walking her to the car, to her entering her apartment. Every second is documented. His instincts had told him to protect himself, and now that decision might save his life. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop while Lily colored beside him. "Daddy, you're quiet," she said softly. He smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. "Just thinking, sweetheart." He replayed the recordings, documenting each timestamp. He knew how this would look. A single black man accused by a white millionaire woman. History had written that story too many times, and it never ended fairly. But Ethan wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to expose something much bigger. He contacted Angela Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney known for taking on powerful corporations. When they met, Ethan laid everything out: emails, chat logs, and a 24-minute audio clip of a private executive meeting where Rebecca and others joked about keeping diversity optics balanced without lowering standards. Angela listened in stunned silence. "How did you get all this?" she asked. Ethan's answer was simple. "Before I was an analyst, I worked in IT. I know where people hide things." As she reviewed the files, her eyes hardened. "This isn't just one incident," she said. "It's a pattern. You're sitting on corporate discrimination evidence that could take down an entire system." Meanwhile, inside Titan Global, Rebecca was celebrating her so-called victory. Over lunch with her colleague Margaret Turner, she bragged about handling the situation before Ethan could play the race card. They laughed, their voices dripping with arrogance. What they didn't know was that Ethan had been recording their conversations through a discrete system he had set up months earlier. Days later, the HR department received an anonymous email. Attached were transcripts, proof of Rebecca's discriminatory remarks, doctored performance records, and security footage showing she took that incriminating photo hours after Ethan had left. The walls began to shake. When the company's CEO, Robert Hayes, was briefed on the evidence, his face turned pale. "Get me Ethan Carter," he ordered. But Ethan wasn't answering. He had already turned everything over to the Department of Justice through Angela. Inside Titan Global, panic spread like wildfire. HR scrambled, executives whispered, and Rebecca's confidence began to crack. Still, she clung to her power. "He's bluffing," she told Margaret. "He has nothing." But the fear in her eyes betrayed her words. At home, Ethan was calm. He watched Lily draw at the table and thought about how many people before him had been crushed in silence. Not this time. He had waited, documented, endured, and now the truth was his weapon. By Friday, reporters were circling the company's headquarters. A federal inquiry had begun. Inside her office, Rebecca received a call from the CEO, his tone icy. "Final. They're coming for answers, Rebecca, and your name is at the center of it." She looked out her window at the city skyline, heart racing, as her empire began to crumble. For the first time in years, Ethan slept peacefully that night. But deep down he knew the fight wasn't over yet. What was coming next would expose not just one woman's lies, but an entire culture built to protect them. By Monday morning, the office was no longer whispering. It was silent, the kind of silence that follows disaster. People avoided eye contact as Ethan walked through the glass corridors of Titan Global for what might be the last time. His suspension had lifted only because the investigation demanded his presence, but he could feel the weight of judgment in every step. Natalie from HR called him into the executive boardroom. The room was crowded. Rebecca sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers and the CEO himself, Robert Hayes. The air felt electric, thick with tension. Folders, files, and a laptop sat in front of Rebecca. Her face was pale but composed, the practiced calm of someone who still believed her title could shield her. Robert cleared his throat. "We're here to resolve a very serious allegation," he began. "Ethan, you've been accused of misconduct toward Miss Sinclair. But new information has surfaced. I'd like to hear your side before we proceed." Ethan's hands rested flat on the table. His voice was low, steady. "Everything Ms. Sinclair claims is false. I drove her home out of concern for her safety. That's it." Rebecca scoffed quietly. "He's lying," she said, turning to the CEO. "You can't seriously believe." Ethan interrupted, not with words, but with action. He opened his laptop and pressed play. The sound filled the room. Rebecca's voice, slurred and emotional, crying in the restroom, thanking Ethan for helping her to the car. The sound of a door opening, a soft good night, and then silence as she entered her home. No shouting, no struggle, just proof of decency. No one moved. Rebecca's face froze. Then another clip began, her conversation at lunch days later, unaware she was being recorded. Her voice was sharp, dismissive. A single black man against a respected white woman? Even today, credibility still matters. The color drained from her face. The CEO's expression hardened. "This isn't real," she whispered. But Ethan wasn't done. He brought up an email chain, internal threads where she and other executives discussed balancing diversity optics and limiting minority promotions to maintain company image. He projected it on the screen for everyone to see. Gasps rippled through the room. Natalie's hand trembled as she reached for her notepad. "Rebecca, did you write these?" she asked. Rebecca's mask cracked. "Those were private discussions taken out of context," she said, her voice rising. "He's hacking company property. This is harassment." Ethan looked at her, calm as ever. "For 2 years, I've documented everything, because I knew this would happen. Every report you altered, every meeting you manipulated, every person you silenced." Robert Hayes leaned back in his chair, stunned. "Rebecca, is any of this true?" She didn't answer. Her silence was its own confession. Moments later, the door opened. 2 men in dark suits entered, federal agents. "Ms. Sinclair," one said, "I'm Special Agent Carter from the Department of Justice. We'd like to ask you some questions." Rebecca turned white. "What is this? You can't just—" The agent placed a folder on the table. "We have recorded evidence of racial discrimination, document tampering, and harassment. Your communications were provided by an anonymous whistleblower." The irony hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew who that whistleblower was. Ethan sat quietly, eyes steady, as the agents began listing the evidence. Altered HR evaluations, falsified complaint logs, and doctored reports to block promotions. The walls that had once protected Rebecca now closed in on her. Robert Hayes stood abruptly, fury replacing shock. "You've jeopardized this entire company," he snapped. "We trusted you." Rebecca's voice broke, the arrogance gone. "I was protecting the company's image," she stammered. "You think investors want—" "Enough!" Robert cut her off. "You're done here." The agents guided her out of the room as the rest of the board sat frozen. Ethan didn't move. He watched as the woman who had tried to destroy his life was now powerless, her empire collapsing under the weight of her own words. But there was no triumph on his face, only exhaustion. Years of restraint, humiliation, and quiet endurance had led to this moment. And while part of him felt vindicated, another part mourned what it had cost. Outside the boardroom, whispers erupted again, this time in his favor. People who once avoided him now looked at him differently. But he didn't linger to soak in their sympathy. He walked out of the building without a word, stepping into the cool Chicago air, his phone buzzing nonstop with news alerts. By evening, headlines had begun to spread. Titan global executive under federal investigation for racial discrimination. News outlets reported anonymous whistleblower evidence, leaked recordings, and corporate cover-ups. Ethan didn't need to see his name in print to know his life would never be the same. That night, as he sat on the edge of his bed, Lily walked in holding her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, baby, I'm okay." She climbed beside him, resting her head on his arm. "You're not sad anymore?" He looked down at her, eyes tired but peaceful. "Not sad, just done." In that quiet moment, with the city lights flickering through the window, Ethan realized the fight wasn't about clearing his name anymore. It was about every person who had been silenced, every worker who had swallowed their pain to keep their job, every moment when truth was buried because of power. He had lit a fire that couldn't be put out. And as the night deepened, one thought echoed in his mind. A thought that felt less like victory and more like a reckoning. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers through the fall of the powerful. And the world was finally listening. When the storm finally passed, Ethan wasn't the same man he'd been before. The company that once dismissed him quietly issued a public statement, an apology wrapped in legal caution, promising a full review of workplace practices. Rebecca resigned before the board could fire her. Within weeks, the news had moved on to the next scandal. But for Ethan, life didn't go back to normal. Couldn't. The media labeled him the whistleblower who brought down a millionaire executive. Strangers congratulated him online. Some called him brave. Others called him a troublemaker. But Ethan didn't care about headlines or hashtags. He cared about peace, about teaching his daughter that telling the truth was worth it, even when the world tried to crush you for it. Still, peace didn't come easily. The lawsuit dragged on for months. He sat through depositions, hearings, and interviews that forced him to relive every moment of humiliation. Each time, lawyers tried to twist his words, to make him seem angry or unstable. But he refused to give them that satisfaction. He answered calmly, truthfully, because he knew he wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was defending the right to be treated with dignity. When the verdict finally came, it wasn't dramatic. The judge ruled in his favor, citing clear evidence of racial discrimination and retaliation. Titan Global was ordered to compensate him and several other employees who'd been quietly pushed aside for years. The settlement was large enough to change his life, but money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was seeing Rebecca's signature on the official apology letter. It wasn't remorse that filled him, but a quiet sense of closure. The system hadn't failed him this time. For once, the truth had survived the noise. Months later, Ethan left Chicago. He moved to Atlanta, closer to his sister and her family, and started a small tech consultancy from home. He hired young developers, Black, Hispanic, Asian, anyone who had been told they didn't fit the company culture. He gave them the opportunities he'd once been denied. Sometimes at night, after Lily fell asleep, he'd sit on the porch and think about everything that happened. The loneliness, the fear, the exhaustion of always being the one who had to prove he belonged. He realized something painful yet freeing. Racism doesn't just live in laws or policies. It hides in the small moments. Unspoken biases, quiet exclusions, polite smiles that disguise distrust. And that's why fighting it feels endless. Because it's not just about changing systems. It's about changing people. One afternoon, a young journalist visited him for an interview. She asked, "If you could go back to that night, when your boss was drunk and you decided to help her, would you still do it?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "Yeah," he finally said, "because doing the right thing isn't about who deserves it. It's about who you are." That answer went viral. Not because it was perfect, but because it was human. People saw in him something simple yet rare. A man who had every reason to hate, but chose to stay kind. The story sparked discussions across the country. Schools invited him to speak about integrity and racial bias. Companies quietly reviewed their diversity policies. But what touched him most were the messages from people who had faced their own silent battles. Employees, parents, young students, thanking him for showing that truth could still win. Ethan never saw himself as a hero. He didn't change the world, not completely. But he changed something. He made people look twice before assuming. He made a few powerful people uncomfortable. And in a world built to silence voices like his, that was enough. Lily, now a little older, sometimes asked him why people on the internet still talked about their story. He'd smile and say, "Because people remember when someone stands up, even when it's hard. And that's the heart of it, isn't it?" The real impact of stories like Ethan's isn't in the courtroom or the headlines. It's in the quiet shift that happens when someone watching says, "That could have been me, or my father, or my friend." Because racism doesn't always wear a hood or shout slurs. Sometimes it wears a suit, signs your paycheck, and smiles as it locks you out of the room. But if Ethan's story proves anything, it's that silence doesn't protect you. It protects the lie. So maybe the question isn't whether racism still exists. We know it does. The question is, when you see it, what will you do? Will you look away? Or will you be the one who finally says, "Enough"? If the story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Don't let it fade into another headline. Because every time someone like Ethan speaks up, and every time someone listens, the world shifts even just a little. And sometimes that little shift is how change truly begins. So what do you think about Ethan's story? Was it just bad luck? Or a reflection of something deeper that still exists in our world today? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think. If the story moved you or made you see things differently, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people discover stories like this, stories that make us think, feel, and question the world we live in.